The pagan Slavs believed that human life was under the rule of the gods of nature. But there came a day when Perun, god of the wrathful sky, and the other Slavic gods were to be cast aside. Over 1,000 years ago, a new religion, Christianity, came to what is now Greater Poland. It happened by the will of the prince of that land, Mieszko of the house of Piast, who received baptism and abandoned the religion of his ancestors. The ceremony apparently took place on Holy Saturday in April 966 and is traditionally acknowledged as marking Poland's conversion to Christianity and the beginning of Polish statehood. Apparently, Mieszko's court and all his subjects were baptized soon afterwards. This romantic story of the origins of Poland was later challenged. Today we still ask, why did Mieszko convert? Was he baptized in 966? Where was the historic ceremony held? And was it really the beginning of Poland? The Cross and the Crown. The hill of Lech in Gniezno is a symbol of the beginning of the Polish state and the church in Poland. Ever since, the memory of the events that took place here at the start of Polish history has passed down through all the generations inhabiting the lands from the Baltic to the Tatras. Gniezno is the burial place of Bishop Adalbert, Poland's first patron saint, slain by the Prussians. In 1000 AD, the Holy Roman Emperor Otto III came on pilgrimage to the martyr's tomb and declared Gniezno the capital of the Polish Church. In 1025, it was here in Gniezno, Archcathedral, that Bolesław the Brave was crowned the first king of Poland. Yet many of the events of those times have been overgrown with legends obscuring the facts relating to the origins of Poland. We speak of Mieszko, Duke of Poland, and Poland's conversion in 966. Every schoolboy knows that's when Poland became a Christian country. The problem is, at the time, no one had ever heard of Poland. When did Poland arise? How? The first chronicler of Polish history, Gallus the Anonymous, wrote nearly 150 years after Mieszko's baptism, creating the myth of the Piastan dynasty's peasant roots, which is only partly credible. Invaluable information on the state ruled by Mieszko and his son Bolesław the Brave comes in the Chronicle of Germany by their contemporary Bishop Titmar of Merseburg. But even with the records from other chroniclers, this is still a very modest amount of information on the beginnings of the Polish state. Only from archaeology and its recent discoveries can we learn more. Tomasz Sawicki's team of archaeologists discovered vestiges of a mysterious barrow next to St. George's Church on Lech's Hill in Gniezno. The stones from which it was constructed go down over 4 meters below the hilltop. Under that, there's a charred layer. The fire which left this layer of ashes was certainly no accident. What we have here is evidence of measures to purify the site for the church. The pagan Slavs believed that hilltops were places where the earth was magically connected with the other world, and they performed their religious rituals there. Lech's Hill, with a stone barrow on its summit, could have been a place where they worshipped their gods. scholars think that this hill could have been the pagan religious center already by the 9th century, and the most powerful clans vied with each other for its control. Gniezno is associated with the beginnings of the Polish state. Whoever took control of Gniezno and the hill of Lech had the right to rule, power of the entire local community. Who took over the hill? When and how did it happen? Archaeologists excavating the earliest tribal hillforts have found that a revolutionary breakthrough occurred in the 920s in what is now Greater Poland. Suddenly, nearly all the hillforts in the southern and western part of the region were destroyed. The inhabitants of the conquered territories were forcibly resettled to the plateau of Gniezno, and the hill of Lech, with its place of pagan worship, was taken over. The archaeologists' further findings were just as exciting. Suddenly, in the middle of the forests of Greater Poland, someone started putting up the framework for a territorial structure. The first big hillforts, all constructed in the same way, went up at Poznań, Giecz, Ostrów Lednicki, Grzybowo, and somewhat later at Gniezno as well. Today we know it was the Piast clan that subdued Greater Poland. They took over Lech's Hill and made their resettled slaves install a network of hillforts marking out the center of Piastan power. The elite members of the ruling clan and their stewards lived in the hillforts, with servants' quarters in the environs. Their farmers reared livestock and cultivated the land. Their craftsmen made utility items, tools, and weapons. More and more merchants from neighboring countries visited the rapidly growing enclave in Greater Poland. Trade flourished. The ruling clan needed huge resources to keep the mercenary soldiers necessary to conquer and defend new territory. Like most other European princes at that time, the Piast dynasty drew most of its revenue from the slave trade. Into its coffers poured silver pieces from Arabia in payment for the slaves the clan sold from conquered territories. More and more people, not just merchants, were getting to hear of the Piast dominions. Indeed, the region started to attract the attention of the chief countries of Europe, not just its central and eastern part, but the whole continent. The first mentions in the chronicles of the Piastan prince of these lands came in the early 960s. What was his name? We don't quite know. The chroniclers spelled it variously: Mexico, Mieszko, Mieshko. What did it mean? We haven't established that either. He has come down in the Polish tradition as Mieszko I. He succeeded to a large country left him by his ancestors, who had been adding new territories to the greater Polish nucleus of their dominion until it reached the Oder in the west. The Piastan prince knew that the land of the Lusatians beyond this river was controlled by his German neighbor and the core of the powerful Holy Roman Empire. The empire enjoyed a certain amount of hegemony, political and ideological supremacy, but it was not an integrated political entity of the kind we think of today as a state. The principalities constituting the empire shared a common ideology based on the legacy of the Christian Roman Empire of late antiquity. The empire's mainstay, the Duchy of Saxony, bordered in the north on warlike pagans, the Polabian Slavic tribes of the menacing Valetian Union. They engaged in warfare under the command of Wichman, a rebel Saxon margrave banished by the emperor. Yet the Valetians posed a threat not only to the empire. Wichman and the Valetians were also enemies of Mieszko I, who engaged in war against them. The Saxon chronicler Widukind made the following entry for 963 on Wichman's expeditions. Twice he defeated King Mieszko, who ruled the Slavs known as the Itikaviki, killing Mieszko's brother and taking a huge amount of plunder. Mieszko anticipated a Velician attack on the center of his territories. What made matters worse was that the Czechs, his neighbors in the south, often allied with the Velicians when they attacked Mieszko. So he resorted to the rule that says, "The enemy of my enemy is my friend," and tried to enter a pact with the empire. In 965, an opportunity cropped up. The emperor convened a congress in Magdeburg, and that's how Mieszko's road to Christianity could have started. The Emperor Otto wanted to restructure the entire system of government in his eastern lands, and Mieszko was without doubt envisaged as part of the new political system. Mieszko was a welcome ally, and my guess is that it was too early to offer him a German princess, the emperor's daughter, in marriage. So instead he was offered the hand of Dobrawa, daughter of the Christian Duke Boleslaus, ruler of the Czechs, whose lands were part of the empire. The chronicles recorded that Dobrawa was sent to Mieszko in 965. This Czech princess of the Przemyslit dynasty, known as Dobrawa, or sometimes Dąbrówka in Polish, was a mature woman when she became Mieszko's wife, a chronicler remarked. I don't think Mieszko would have seen his Christian bride before the ceremony. It was certainly a question of cementing his alliance with the Czechs, which Mieszko was in desperate need of at the time. Dobrawa was familiar with the principles on which her father's state worked. For the barbarian chieftain Mieszko was considered to be, her knowledge was an invaluable asset. Now that Mieszko had allies, the Velicians and Volhynians were left in their own. He had military support from the emperor and from the Czechs. Soon the time came to test this alliance. On September 22, 967, Wichman launched another Velician and Volhynian offensive against Mieszko. This time Mieszko was not alone in his effort to defend his realm east of the Oder. One of the conjectures on the developments in this battle says it was determined by the surprise rear attack of Mieszko's infantry on Wichman's forces. The commander of the invaders was forced to flee from the field of battle. With support from his father-in-law's Czech forces, Mieszko won and took over the estuary of the Oder and Volyn, the biggest and wealthiest Slavic port on the Baltic coast. The Saxon chronicler recording this triumph called him an amicus imperatoris, the emperor's friend. In other words, Mieszko was the emperor's collaborator, privileged advisor, and above all, the trustworthy ally trying to keep the eastern flank stable. Can we draw any further conclusions from this entry in the chronicle? Someone who was the emperor's friend could not have been a pagan. This could mean that Mieszko was baptized even before his victory over Wichman in September 967. So there was a theory that it could have happened at the turn of June and July 965 during the Magdeburg Congress. It's almost certain that he must have attended it, and if he was and made a friendship pact with the emperor at that time, then he must have had baptism administered to him. Yet a slightly later time, 966, is the year traditionally regarded as the date of Mieszko's baptism. The book of records of important events has not come down to our times. Why is this the accepted date?
W 1266 roku
In 1266, exactly 300 years after Mieszko was baptized, a transcript was made from this record book, and it says 966, Mieszko dux Polonarum baptizatur. And that's the date that has stuck. Establishing a date for an anniversary is quite exciting, really. It shapes our social and collective memory and our national identity. What's just as mysterious as the date of Mieszko's baptism is the place where this historic ceremony could have been held. Yet most scholars think it wasn't abroad, but at home. Why? At home, because the baptism of the prince and his court had to be a public ceremony. It was a prominent act on his part, and his subjects had to see it done. If at home, then where? Historians started looking for signs of Mieszko's baptism in the chief strongholds of his state. On Ostrów Tumski Island, where the Piast princes built the original stronghold of Poznań, there is a majestic cathedral. In the 1950s, in its basement, archaeologists discovered vestiges of the earliest church and a round structure made of limestone with a post hole. They took it for the remains of a baptismal font. That interpretation has since been challenged, and the issue is still being debated. We know of about 30 similar artifacts throughout Europe dated to more or less the same time, and everywhere except Poznań they are regarded simply as troughs for mixing large quantities of mortar. Yet I'm inclined to come down in favor of the idea that what we have in Poznań is an immersion baptismal font, especially as it was put in a special four-sided building. A recent in-depth study carried out by Dr. Aneta Bukowska, who examined all the excavation data from Poznań Cathedral, showed that there was no question of there being any structures in front of the cathedral. If it wasn't in Poznań, then perhaps Mieszko was baptized on Lech's Hill in Gniezno in a symbolic act terminating pagan worship. In an examination of the oldest parts of the arch-cathedral, archaeologist Tomasz Janiak determined the successive stages in its construction and found that the most ancient structure was a rotunda church. But there were no signs of a baptismal pool, and what's more, all the researchers agreed that the rotunda was built after 966, so this theory was disproved. There was yet another place in the heart of Mieszko's greater Polish realm that might have been connected with his baptism, Ostrów Lednicki. This island was the site of one of the main strongholds. Among the surviving parts of the foundations and walls of the royal chapel, archaeologists discovered two symmetrically arranged pools. Could they have been used for the administration of baptism? Could this be where Mieszko was baptized? Here again, there is scholarly debate. Currently, we are inclined to consider this was the royal chapel equipped with pools which would have served as a baptistry whenever the sacrament was administered here. There's one question: were they really early enough to have witnessed Mieszko's baptism in 966? Let's leave it open until we confirm the archaeological chronology. The special atmosphere of Ostrów Lednicki makes you imagine this location as the place where Mieszko was christened. Does that seem too far-fetched? I think it's highly probable that this is where Mieszko was baptized, in view of the exceptional artistic class of the architecture of this building, reflecting the rank of the ceremony it was to be used for. So where was Poland's first ruler on historical record baptized? Perhaps we'll never know for certain. The next question intriguing scholars was, Why did Mieszko decide to become a Christian? Titmar, the Saxon chronicler, wrote that Dobrawa was very anxious to win her husband over to the Christian faith. She could have been the first to tell him that Christianity offered the hope of eternal life. Death is not the end. On the contrary, death opens up the door to eternal life, on condition that you believe in Christ and follow the rules of Holy Church, and you'll be saved. That's the sense of human existence.
To jest sens I istota ludzkiej egzystencji.
An unusual discovery at Ostrów Tumski in Poznań may serve as evidence for Dobrawa's piety. Beneath the Church of the Blessed Virgin Mary near the cathedral, archaeologists have come across the remains of the royal palace and a chapel with religious furnishings. Could this chapel have gone back to Dobrawa's times? Apart from the archaeological materials which help us determine when the building was raised, we also have an indication from another scientific test. We have a piece of the threshold beam. The tree from which it was made was cut down after 941. The result of the test for the age of the wood means that the chapel could have been built before Mieszko was baptized. How could that be? Presumably, Dobrawa, who was a Christian, must have had a place set aside for worship when she arrived at Mieszko's court, when he was still a pagan. And this little chapel would have served that purpose. The chapel next to Mieszko's palace, now known as Dobrawa's chapel, is the most ancient religious building discovered in the Piastan state. What were the consequences Mieszko could have expected from his decision to become a Christian? The baptism of their prince was something his pagan people and its elite class did not want. They feared retribution from their gods, who would stop the rain, make fire consume their homes, and the wind destroy their crops. Mieszko's subjects might rebel, which in those days usually ended in the death of the prince. Conversion also meant the loss of substantial revenue from the slave trade, of which Christianity disapproved. It would not guarantee peace either, for Christian countries often fought wars against each other. So what made Mieszko to take the risk? Was it only his strong faith? Perhaps he was wondering why the Emperor Otto I was such a great monarch and so rich. And perhaps he concluded it was because the Christian religion was more effective, because Christ was a more powerful God. There is a view that Mieszko was well aware of the threat posed by the empire and had no other option. He did not have to. The Polabian tribes continued to evade conversion for several more generations, and even in situations when they were forced to take baptism, it soon turned out that the measure was abortive, not put into effect. The Piast princes were fascinated by the superior culture and civilization of their neighbors west of the Oder. They wanted to be part of the system held together by the emperor as its linchpin. They wanted to belong to the empire on the same principle and with the same rights as those enjoyed by the lords of Saxony in the eastern part of Otto's empire. There's one more important point about Mieszko's victory over Wichman and the Walisians in September 967. Wichman was caught by Mieszko's soldiers as he tried to flee the field. Before he died of his wounds, he asked for his sword to be taken to Mieszko and handed over to the emperor, who would either be glad that the rebel had been killed or weep over the death of his kinsman. Convinced he had won thanks to God's help, Mieszko sent the sword to the emperor as Wichman had wanted. Apparently, the emperor was very impressed by this gesture worthy of a Christian prince, and the Pope took a historic decision. We may speculate that the synod was held already on January 2nd, 968, and it was at this synod that the Diocese of Poznań was founded, so the delivery of the sword resulted in the grant of a bishopric. The Pope sent Bishop Jordan, who was directly under the authority of the Holy See. The Czechs did not have a bishop of their own yet. What did that mean for Mieszko? A tremendous political success. A bishop for Poland, probably residing at Poznań, but with spiritual authority over the whole of Mieszko's realm.
Cały obszar panowania Mieszka I.
Another asset achieved thanks to Mieszko's delivery of Wichman's sword to the emperor was an artifact known as St. Peter's sword, a gift from the Pope which Bishop Jordan brought to Mieszko. The Pope had this weapon put on St. Peter's tomb, which made it a contact relic. Metallographic tests and the class of weapons to which it belongs show that St. Peter's sword may be said to be the most ancient Christian artifact on Polish soil.
Za najstarszy zabytek związany z chrześcijaństwem na ziemiach Polski.
After Mieszko's baptism, the time came for his subjects to break with the religion of their forefathers. Like other Slavs in the pre-Christian period, the people of Greater Poland are believed to have worshipped the spirits of their ancestors and the gods of the natural forces. Hilltops, sacred groves, and lake islands served as places of worship. An idea of how Mieszko must have gone about the destruction of the sites where the old religion was practiced and the idols of the pagan deities is presented in chronicles on the introduction of Christianity in neighboring countries. What do we know about the religious beliefs in the land of the first Piastian princes before the arrival of Christianity? Hardly anything at all on the Slavic religion, its organization and practices. We don't know whether there was a class of priests who might have resisted, nor whether there were any temples or idols that had to be destroyed. It's generally believed that Mieszko soon spread Christianity throughout his realm. The chronicler Titmar was in no doubt that the whole nation followed the example of their beloved prince. If we were to take this at face value, as an archaeologist, I would expect there to be clear evidence in the archaeology. Mieszko's subjects should have adopted the Christian form of burial and stopped cremating their dead. In pre-Christian times, all the Slavs practiced cremation. Presumably, the rite varied depending on the social status of the deceased. The pagan burial rite clashed with the Christian tradition of interring the whole body, or as we archaeologists say, inhumation. Did cremation stop immediately after Mieszko was baptized? What has the excavation of burial grounds shown? We don't have a single inhumation burial datable to Mieszko's reign on the main territory under his rule. That comes as a shock. So for a considerable time, Christianity appears to have been the religion of the court. Mieszko doesn't seem to have been in much of a hurry to make all his subjects Christians. Christianity must have been very superficial and limited to the upper class, but the very fact that the prince and his elite were Christians was enough for the whole country to be treated as Christian. Was Mieszko really the first Christian in Poland? In the life of Saint Methodius, there is talk of a Wislan prince who was forced to convert by the Christian Moravians. Hence, scholars concluded somewhere in Lesser Poland under Great Moravia there must have been a Wislan principality ruled by a Christian already by the late 9th century. Its capital might have been modern Wiślica, a town in Lesser Poland. Over 50 years ago, archaeologists discovered the foundations of a stone church near the 14th century collegiate church there, with a limestone trough which was taken for a baptismal basin. In it, St. Methodius was believed to have baptized masses of the local people nearly 100 years before Mieszko's times. In the last decade, the site was re-examined. The structure those archaeologists thought was a baptismal font turned out to be a figment of their imagination. We now know it was not man-made and had nothing to do with baptismal fonts, nor with the baptism of a Wislan prince. Mieszko's good relations with the empire were disrupted by an incident of fighting in 972, when Hodo, Margrave of Lusatia, overran the Piastan lands on the Oder. Mieszko had to fight back. A battle was fought without the emperor's knowledge, probably near modern Cedynia, in which Mieszko won. Hodo ran for his life. But there was a consequence for Mieszko's son, little Boleslaus. The Emperor Otto I decided the boy had to be handed over as a hostage to guarantee peace on the empire's eastern border. To improve relations with the empire around 980 after the death of Dobrawa, Mieszko married Oda, daughter of Dietrich, Margrave of the Northern March. Shortly afterwards, he married Boleslaus to the daughter of Rigdag, Margrave of Meissen. Over just a few years, dynastic marriages alternated with military clashes. It was all a sort of game. What was at stake in this game was the takeover of what is now Silesia, Lesser Poland, and Kraków from Czech influence. Mieszko was an extremely pragmatic, very talented ruler, most outstanding, I'd say. He founded Poland. I can see him switching allies, making versatile moves. He'd be in a critical situation and suddenly he'd turn around and resolve the crisis with just a word. Shortly before his death, around 992, Mieszko reputedly had a document known as Dagome Judex drawn up, in which he and his wife Oda and their two sons made a gift of their realm to St. Peter, in other words, to the Holy See. In this mysterious deed, Mieszko's dominions are called the Civitas Sienieskie, the state of Gniezno. Until recently, historians thought that by offering his realm to the Pope, Mieszko was trying to protect it from the influence of the German Church. We shouldn't think of this deed as an act against the empire, an attempt to break free of imperial hegemony, because at the time there were two aspects to Rome: Papal Rome and Imperial Rome.
To był Rzym papieski i Rzym cesarski.
A country would be the private estate of its prince, and after his death it would be divided up between his sons. Perhaps Oda anticipated that Boleslaus would not keep this custom, so maybe Dagome Judex was drawn up on her initiative after the death of Mieszko, because it doesn't mention Boleslaus and his mother Dobrawa with the other donators. Boleslaus did exactly what Oda had feared he would.
Wypędził i swoją macochę,
He banished his stepmother and half-brothers and went further. He inflicted a cruel punishment on those who had supported them. Two aristocrats who had dared to assist them were blinded. Boleslaus, who earned the byname of the Brave, was determined to continue the work his father had started by joining the group of Christian princes. He had a clear objective: to make it into the top echelon of world society of those times. The emperor was the unquestionable leader of that elite, but next to him were the other kings, in a sense, all his equals. And it was Mieszko's and Bolesław's aspiration to acquire the rank of a king. Mieszko did not win the honor of wearing a king's crown. For his son, this was the most important aim. How did he begin his efforts to secure it? By launching an intensive campaign to establish Christianity in the whole of his realm. He started raising churches, built either of stone or of wood. He began with his chief strongholds. One of them was Kraków, which he had probably governed still in his father's lifetime. Over 100 years ago, archaeologists discovered the remains of a religious structure below ground level at the top of Wawel Hill. It was a rotunda now known as the Church of St. Felix and Adoctus. Well-preserved sections of its walls and architectural details give an idea of the sophisticated shape of this pre-Romanesque building on a quatrefoil plan. In the opinion of scholars, it was Bolesław's royal chapel. It turned out that it wasn't the only religious building Bolesław raised on Wawel Hill. Nearby, archaeologists discovered the remains of a second, smaller rotunda church. They also identified the vestiges of what could have been a basilica church founded by Bolesław around 1000 AD. Wawel Castle was Bolesław's main stronghold in the south of his realm, but he built churches in the whole of his lands, as archaeology has shown. The principal religious edifice in Bolesław's state was erected in Poznań, the seat of the bishopric. When Jordan, the first bishop in Mieszko's state, died, Unger, abbot of Memleben Abbey in the empire, was appointed his successor. Was it thanks to him that the cathedral raised in Poznań was built in accordance with the best imperial standards? When Unger became bishop of Poznań, he kept his office as abbot of Memleben. And since the churches of Memleben and the slightly later one at Poznań are very similar, we may speculate that Memleben Church was the model for Poznań Cathedral, and perhaps even the same builders built it.
I być może został wybudowany przez ten sam warsztat budowlany.
Under the guidance of Bishop Unger, Bolesław the Brave completed the building of Poznań Cathedral, which his father had started. No other church edifice was so monumental, not only in the Polish but even in the Czech lands. Ostrów Lednicki held a special place among the principal strongholds of Bolesław's realm. Next to the royal palace and chapel, it had a church for the inhabitants. Religious items of the highest artistic quality were discovered here, including a gilt starotek, a reliquary in the shape of a Greek cross, trimmings made from horn for a reliquary box, and gilt metal trimmings for a liturgical book. The churches in the strongholds helped to spread Christianity in their region. Bolesław not only disseminated the faith among his own people, he also assisted the emperor's missions to the Polabians, in which Adalbert, former bishop of Prague and future saint, was to participate. Adalbert was a celebrity in the intellectual milieu of contemporary Europe. He was a friend of the emperor and the pope, and of diverse holy hermits. He was a man of distinction. Adalbert came to Bolesław in the spring of 997, but changed his destination. Instead of heading for the Polabians, he set off for the land of the Prussians. Bolesław helped the missionary by granting him an escort of 30 armed men. As depicted in the bas-relief on the renowned 12th century door of Gniezno Cathedral, Adalbert and his half-brother Radzim Gaudenty and a Polish priest named Bogusza sailed down the Vistula for Gdańsk. There, Adalbert preached to crowds of people and then administered baptism. Then the missionaries headed for the land of the Prussians, where they were attacked and Adalbert was murdered. His head was put up on a pole. After their release, his companions took it to Bolesław at Gniezno. What was the prince's reaction in this dramatic situation? Brilliant. He responded with a touch of genius. He knew very well what he was doing by redeeming Saint Adalbert's body. If it's true that he paid for its weight in gold, as tradition would have us believe, the investment was well worth it. Boleslaus interred Adalbert's body in the chapel by the Rotunda at Gniezno, which rose to the rank of the country's religious focus. The presence of a saint's body, for Adalbert was soon canonized, was to dispel the evil forces of paganism from Lech's Hill. Pilgrims started coming to the saint's tomb. The most distinguished pilgrim was the Emperor Otto III himself. Never before had there been a visit east of the imperial border like the one that took place in 1000 AD. The emperor was expecting Boleslaus to hand over the saint's body, relics from which he could then take to Rome. He brought lavish gifts, a copy of the lance of Saint Maurice, the Roman martyr, and a nail from the cross of Jesus. It was indeed a symbol of Boleslaus's right to spread Christianity to other peoples, in other words, to extend his territory and of his right to act as a leader. The young Otto III wanted to promote the Slavic prince. With the Pope's support, he wanted to revive the Roman Empire of ancient times in a new Christian spirit and geopolitical shape. Alongside Italy, Gaul, and Germany, there was to be a fourth partner in the empire, Sklavina, the Slavs under the leadership of Boleslaus the Brave. Boleslaus was specially selected, designated for the rank of minor king. It was the emperor's prerogative to appoint such a king and grant him authority over the entire eastern borderland. And of course, make him the emperor's co-worker. Gallus, the anonymous chronicler, writes of an unexpected event during the feast given by Boleslaus in the emperor's honor. Today its meaning is still a subject of debate. Otto III is said to have put his imperial diadem on the head of Boleslaus. In the Polish tradition, this act has been interpreted as a coronation, but maybe that's going too far. It wasn't a coronation, but perhaps the promise of one. The most signal event of the visit was Otto's announcement of the Roman Synod's decision to found an archdiocese in Boleslaus's realm, with its seat in Gniezno. The bishops of Wrocław, Kraków, and Kołobrzeg were put under the authority of the Archbishop of Gniezno, St. Adalbert's half-brother Radzim Gaudenty. The Diocese of Poznań was subject directly to Rome. Henceforth, the church in Boleslaus's lands had a structure and hierarchy linking it directly with Rome. Parish churches started to be built in the dioceses. Most were wooden, like the one archaeologists discovered in the Zawodzie Hilfert at Kalisz, on the site where later a stone collegiate church was built. More and more of Boleslaus's subjects could attend church services, and congregations grew, as the excavated burial grounds show. Our first inhumation burials date back to the reign of Boleslaus the Brave. We also have coins with a distinct sign of the cross on them. We have imported artifacts. From the archaeologist's point of view, this is an evident change, so it was Boleslaus the Brave who made Poland truly Christian. Boleslaus conducted missions among his people. The emperor supported him. In 1001, Otto sent two hermit monks, Benedict and John, to Poland to continue the work of Saint Adalbert. They were joined by two Slavs as novices and settled in a hermitage at Międzyrzecz on the river Obra. In 1003, all four and their Polish servant, Krystyn, were attacked and murdered. We don't know who did it and why. Did they die because of a clash between the old and new religion? Or was it simply an armed robbery, to use the modern police term? A year later, the five brothers were canonized as the first Polish martyrs. since when has Poland been known as Poland? Around the year 1000, Latin names for the country started to appear in a variety of sources abroad, chiefly in Italy. Polania, Polinia, Polonia. Boleslaus accepted the last name and on his denarii put the inscription Princeps Poloniae, Prince of Polonia. And ever since, we may say that Poland has indeed been known as Poland, but all the signs are that the name was created abroad in a rather random way. Poland's situation changed completely in 1002 when Boleslaus's ally, the Emperor Otto III, suddenly died at the age of just 22. His successor had an entirely different idea of how to exercise power. Henry II wanted to create a new model of power, the direct vassalage of his princes and those, like Boleslaus, designated to be kings. Boleslaus the Brave could never have agreed to that. To keep his realm, Boleslaus had to transform from a missionary prince to a fierce warrior. He adopted the rule that the best defense was to attack and clashed with Europe's most powerful overlord. He invaded Lusatia and Mieszko, and when the Czechs asked him for help, extended his dominions south down to the Danube. In 1004, Henry assailed Boleslaus. The war went on for over a decade with short intervals, and the extent of their respective territories varied. (1017) was a particularly dramatic year, but glorious for Boleslaus. First, he pushed a Ruthenian attack back across the Bug River, then marched swiftly for Silesia, where he stopped an assault by German, Czech, and Venetian forces. The imperial army sustained heavy losses and was forced to retreat via the Czech lands, while Boleslaus marched up to the empire's eastern border and compelled Henry to sue for peace. The Peace of Budziszyń was hailed as a compromise, but in practice it meant defeat for the empire. It's no exaggeration to say that the first Piast rulers created a mighty state. Now Boleslaus wanted to defeat Jarosław, Duke of Ruthenia, and set his son-in-law, Świętopełk, Jarosław's rival, on the throne. On July 22nd, 1018, Boleslaus won a decisive victory in a clash near the Bug, and 3 weeks later was at the gates of the great city of Kiev, capital of Ruthenia. Jarosław fled without putting up a fight. Boleslaus the Brave had the biggest and richest city in Eastern Europe at his feet. As he rode into it, he must have felt his tremendous power, although the story of the sword he scratched on its gate is only a legend. The unvanquished conqueror now waited for the right moment to fulfill his life's greatest dream. The Basilica Church he had built on Lech's Hill in Gniezno, where he had made a new tomb for Saint Adalbert, was waiting too. Finally, in April 1025, came the event marking the peak of his reign. Boleslaus was crowned king by Hippolytus, Archbishop of Gniezno, after 33 years of work to build up the state. His coronation was the highlight of his reign, underpinning the sovereignty of the state and most definitely conferring a new dignity on him, that of a Christian king, God's anointed one, in a much higher rank than that of a prince or duke. The Spear of St. Moritz, bestowed on him by Otto III in 1000, added splendor to Boleslaus's crown. These insignia showed that Boleslaus was a king and Poland a kingdom. It would not have been possible if Mieszko had not received baptism and entered the family of Christian princes, if Adalbert had not died a martyr, if the Congress of Gniezno had not issued those important decisions. That was when Poland was created by the cross and the crown, and that is how she would prosper and continue over the ages to come. Directed by Zdzisław Cozac, screenplay by Zdzisław Cozac and Błażej Stanisławski, commentary by Zdzisław Cozac, English translation by Teresa Bałuk-Ulewiczowa, read by Sławomir Szewc, produced by Media Promocja Zdzisław Cozac and Telewizja Polska S.A.